My name is Henry Gwardsman. You probably don't remember me, but you've probably seen me on TV. I'm the person they call on the Sunday morning news and CNN when they want analysis and opinion on the crazy leader of North Korea. I'm an expert, a talking head. I've spent the last 20 years working at the State Department, various foreign policy think tanks, and in academia. I'm currently a professor at the Fletcher School of Law and Diplomacy at Tufts University, just outside of Boston, as well as a visiting professor at the Kennedy School of Government at Harvard and Stanford University in Palo Alto, California. I know it all sounds pretty prestigious, and it is. However, outside of my clique of the smartest colleagues, I am the most ordinary person imaginable. I'm 51 years old, 5'9", 185 pounds, and there's nothing about me that catches your attention. No woman has ever looked at me and thought I was hot. No woman has ever fantasized about me in bed. No woman has ever wanted me, with the exception of my wife. Therein lies my story. Emily and I have been married for 24 years. She works as a research librarian at the Boston Public Library and is 46 years old, but most people say she looks about 5 years younger. We met when she was an undergraduate and I was a graduate student. I was a teaching assistant in her class, and we started dating right after she finished her course. We got married 3 weeks after she graduated. She is 5'6" and weighs about 135 pounds. When I first saw her, she was shapely, and she still has all the curves that I love. I was drawn to her intelligence, wry humor, sparkling smile, bright blue eyes, strawberry blonde hair, freckles on her nose and cheeks, and beautiful, feminine figure. Oh, and her breasts. One can only dream of them. 38D. And if that's not the first thing you notice about Emily O'Hara, it's the second and third. As a child, Emily was a bit chubby and quite insecure about her appearance. All 3 of her sisters are tall and built like models, and by that I mean not my type at all. I was Emily's first lover and she was mine. She grew up in a very conservative family and was taught to take care of herself before marriage. She almost succeeded. When Emily and I finally made love, it was the night I asked her to marry me. Unlike Emily, my virginity depended not on desire but on opportunity. I had never had an opportunity. My life before I met her had been filled with crushes on unattainable beauties, numerous first dates followed by "Henry, let's stay friends" speeches, and hundreds if not thousands of nights all alone. Girls may like athletes and musicians and even business majors with growth prospects, but pimply-faced nerds with a passion for international diplomacy don't have much opportunity for lovemaking. Meeting Emily meant passing an exam that the entire O'Hara family took. She is the second of 4 sisters. The eldest, Shannon, is a year older than Emily and has some of Emily's physical characteristics: hair color, freckles, pretty face, but she lacks slenderness. I understand why some men find her attractive, but I never liked her. Her character reminded me of the worst stereotype of a high school cheerleader: shallow, materialistic to the extreme, and condescending to those she considered beneath her. At the time I first met her family, she had already been married for a year to Brad Smithson, a tall, handsome guy who had been an athlete in high school and college, and at the time was starting his career at one of Boston's most prestigious investment firms. Then there was Joni, the third of 4 children. She was pretty, but even less slender. I met her when she was a senior in high school, and we became friends through her obvious intelligence. I helped her with her college essays. She eventually went to Northwestern University and then earned a doctorate in biochemistry from MIT. Joni later married Will, a researcher who spends most of his time at Woods Hole, an oceanographic center on Cape Cod. Of Emily's entire family, I was closest to Joni. The youngest was Denise. She was a freshman and resembled Emily the most. She was also the wild child in the family. Back in high school, she had a lot of boyfriends, several arrests for smoking pot and showing up in public drunk, and an embarrassing pregnancy for the family that caused her to drop out of school for a semester, carry the baby to term, and give it up for adoption. In her 20s and 30s, Denise married Matt, divorced and remarried, this time to David. They currently reside in Keene, New Hampshire. My first meeting with my family was at a Thanksgiving celebration. I was raised in foster care, so Thanksgiving always had its disruptions. But it was a big event for the O'Hara clan. Patrick O'Hara and his wife Sarah made sure all their children attended at the family home in Tynesboro, a suburb of Boston. It was a great time, and even though I got a third degree from Emily's parents and her older sister, I really enjoyed it. When Emily walked me to my car late Thanksgiving night, she informed me that I had passed the test. "I hope it wasn't too difficult. My family can be a little stressful," she said. "No, it was fine. I had a really good time. I think everyone liked me, but you know how bad I am at reading? Well, I'm not sure about your sister's husband, Brad. He seemed a little dorky to me." "You did great. Drive safe. I love you." "I love you too." 2 years after we were married, Caitlin was born. She was the spitting image of Emily and the apple of my eye. 30 months later, Sean Patrick was born. By age 12, he was taller and broader in the shoulders than me and played lacrosse in middle school. Emily chose to be a stay-at-home mom from the time Caitlin was born until Sean Patrick went to kindergarten, and she seemed to love it. It allowed her to find time for church and community involvement, and she even turned her master's thesis into a book, which sold better than any of mine. I was so proud of her. She worked hard to get back into shape, and at times her body image-related self-esteem issues came back to haunt her. Through hours spent in the gym and self-discipline in the kitchen, she not only got back into pre-pregnancy shape, but she looked even better. Over the years, my career required a lot of traveling, regularly from Boston to Washington and back, so much so that we have an apartment in the Washington suburbs, as well as to New York, Palo Alto, and occasionally London, and several times a year to Tokyo and Seoul. Whenever possible, Emily traveled with me, especially on foreign trips. But because of the kids and her work, it didn't happen very often. Once a month, or sometimes more often, she would spend a few days and visit Shannon and Brad at their home in Nashua, New Hampshire. It was only a 90-minute drive from our home in Cambridge, and in the summer, she would spend a couple weeks at the Lake Winnipesaukee house. Emily talked me, along with Shannon and Brad, into buying it a few years ago. I loved it there, but rarely went there. I especially loved being there when it was just the four of us, sans my sister and Emily's husband. Our marriage was wonderful. We were true partners, intellectually, emotionally, and spiritually. If someone asked me what the key to our happiness was, I would say trust and respect. I trusted Emily with my life. She was successful in her career, and we attended many social events together. Early on, we promised that we would never do anything that would embarrass each other in public, and we never did. Emily had an intolerance for alcohol, and so decided never to appear in public. I might have a beer or glass of wine at home, but never at a social event. "Henry, in 2 weeks, on Friday, we're supposed to go to the Library Foundation dinner. I put it on your calendar, so hopefully you can go." I did. "It'll be fine. But you know you're going to have to give me a refresher course in dance if you're going to get me on the parquet." "I don't think that's a bad idea. I love dancing with you, and you know I won't dance with anyone else. I hate it when someone else touches me." "I hate it when someone else touches you, too, and I won't ask anyone else to dance with me because, you know." "Yeah. Carolyn once asked me in the president's office why you never dance with anyone but me, and I had to make an excuse. I couldn't tell her that you get tense on short notice and are embarrassed to tell anyone. Personally, I'm glad my middle-aged husband doesn't have arousal issues." "Oh, wait, my prim and proper wife is talking about my erection, and in the middle of the day. What will your parents think?" For most of our marriage, our sex life was normal. Not great, just normal. Without a doubt, I wanted sex more than my wife did, both before and after we had kids. I was ready every day. But for her, once or twice a week was enough. Not that she didn't enjoy it. She said she did, that she almost always had an orgasm or two, and she enjoyed cuddling afterward, but she was usually pretty passive. I could count on the fingers of one hand how many times a year she initiated sex, never wanted to turn on the lights, and never did it during the day. Because she made a lot of noise, she was always afraid the kids would hear. And judging from the previous conversation, she hardly ever talked about sex. She didn't tell me what she liked or enjoyed, and she never admitted to her fantasies. I would tell her about mine, and she would just wave it off as if such things were too gross for her to even think about. I figured it was probably because of her conservative upbringing. And so we come to the present moment. Well, about 6 weeks ago. It was the beginning of October. Caitlin was living in Paris, working on her French literature degree, And Sean Patrick was at Cornell, a member of the Academic Specialty of the Month Club. I think it's cultural anthropology now. I better start saving more money for retirement, because there's no way these kids have enough income to take care of me in my old age. Anyway, the kids left the house. It was Friday night, and I was particularly excited. The crisp early fall weather has that effect on me. Emily and I showered together, and I could tell she was in the mood. "That was amazing, sweetheart. I love that we have freedom when the kids are gone," Emily said. "I love hearing from you. It turns me on when I know you're really enjoying it." We cuddled for a few moments in the afternoon light, and then she surprised me with the kind of pillow talk we'd never had. "Baby, if it wasn't morally wrong and I gave you permission, which of my sisters would you want to have sex with?" Honey, I don't know if you know this, but there is a husband's handbook, and one of the chapters in that book is called Questions Men Should Never Answer. The question you just asked is either number 1 or number 2. No man in his right mind would answer it. I think the other main question is, honey, if I died before you, who would you marry? Seriously, you always want to talk about fantasies, so I give you permission to talk about them. Which of my sisters did you fantasize about? Okay, I'll answer. None of them. You don't have to tell me that. Are you saying that if God and I gave you permission to have sex with Shannon, you wouldn't do it? No, I wouldn't. I just don't find her attractive. She's wearing too much makeup, and she doesn't have your beautiful figure. The only thing she does have is breasts that miraculously appeared after her 35th birthday, which I'm sure cost Brad a tidy sum. Also, Shannon can be a bitch. Okay, so no Shannon. How about Joni or Denise? No and no, they're just not my type. I consider Joni a friend, and she has a great brain, but she's not sexy at all. Denise may be sexy, but just touching her makes me want to take an hour-long shower. No, thank you. I'm perfectly happy with the O'Hara sister I have. She's all mine. If one of your sisters was Julia Roberts or Scarlett Johansson, then we could talk. You've always had a thing for Julia Roberts? Why is that? It's the laugh. I love her laugh. Let's see if I can make you laugh the way she does. Then, for the first time in a long time, we played a second round of the game. It wasn't more than a few days later when I overheard a phone conversation. I was taking the dog out for her nightly walk, but it started pouring rain and we finished early. I walked in the back door and heard my wife talking on her cell phone in the living room. "Yes, Joni, I tried." "He's just not interested." "No, of course not. I just asked him if he's ever fantasized about having sex with any of my sisters." "No, that's not exactly what I said. We're talking about St. Henry. He never does anything inappropriate. Look, I have no idea why you want this to happen. He's just not that good, and he's certainly not that great. My Henry won't know if a woman is flirting with him if she throws her naked body in his lap. And he has no idea how to flirt. I don't know how he got me. Yeah, 4 would have been better than 3. But it worked so well for so long. What is this nonsense? Think, Henry, think, what was that? I can decipher the insane rantings of an angry Korean lunatic, but I have no idea what my own wife is talking about. A few days later, I was walking through Davis Square in Somerville, and I heard, Henry Guardsman. I turned around and saw Matt Barnes, my sister-in-law Denise's first husband. "Bad news, Barnes. How's it going?" "Damn, Henry, I miss you calling me that. Got time for a beer?" We went to the pub and had a chat. "Matt, I'm so sorry things didn't work out with you and Denise." "It's all right. It really wasn't meant to be. The marriage was long gone by the time you found out about it. I'm sure all you heard was that I cheated on Denise, but she cheated on me from the beginning." "I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't know. Anyway, how's the plumbing business going? I keep hearing your commercials on the radio and seeing them on TV. It's all good. And I got remarried. She's wonderful. She's a school teacher in Malden. 2 boys from my first marriage, and we have a girl on the way. Congratulations." We sat and drank our Samuel Adams, and then Matt looked at me awkwardly. "Henry, I have to ask you something. I like you, and I always thought you were a pretty good guy, and I never felt like you looked down on me like that asshole, Brad. Anyway, how do you feel about what Emily's doing with her sisters?" "Well, Matt, I know they're close and everything, so they talk all the time, and I just always thought that's how families work. I've never had a family like that, so I didn't know. But I mean about sex. How could you think about that? I certainly couldn't. Matt, what are you talking about? Oh, shit. Henry, you're serious. You don't know? Denise told me you knew and you were fine with it. She just asked me not to talk to you because you were afraid I'd think you were a wuss or something. Really, you don't know? And then, within the next half hour, Matt Bad News Barnes ruined my life. There was no doubt that my marriage was over. However, I needed more information to decide what to do. Divorce was a sure thing, but I needed to know if Emily loved me. One phone call to colleagues at a certain three-letter government agency gave me the information I needed about equipment and how to obtain it. I installed listening devices on Emily's cell phone, in her purse, and in her car. On Thursday night, the week before Thanksgiving, I was sitting in the family room watching an NFL game. After Emily went to bed, I went into the room, opened the app that allowed me to listen to her calls, and heard both sides of the phone conversation between Emily and her sister Shannon. So, Em, you're coming to the lake this weekend to set up, right? Yeah, I'll be there. My wife's voice sounded neither happy nor excited, but rather resigned. Did you do everything Brad said? Yeah, I guess I did. Look, Em, this is very important. You have to do everything he says. Okay, dear sister. I always do whatever Brad wants. I only gave Henry sex a few times a month. Shannon, I can't believe this. Why Brad has to be like this? Because he's an asshole, that's why. And you're not as bad as me. I stayed married to him all these years with all his cheating and other bullshit. Mostly because of his great sex, but also to save your marriage. If we don't do what Brad says, he's going to tell Henry everything. Don't forget that. I know, Shannon, I know. This is a living hell. How did we ever let it get this far? Emily, you know how. Your curiosity, your big boobs, and Brad's insatiable sexual appetite, that's how. It is what it is. So here's the schedule. This Friday night, Joni and Will, Denise and David, and you are coming to the lake to play. Sunday night, everyone else will go home. You'll stay and play with Brad. And when Henry and Mom and Dad and everyone else gets here the day before Thanksgiving, we'll be a typical American family. Sure, okay. Come on, Em. You know you love it. It hurts, but yeah, I love it. When I'm there, it's really nice. I love the way it feels when Brad's massive meat enters me and treats me like his personal whore. But then, when I get home, I realize what I've done. I'm so ashamed. You should be ashamed. Henry doesn't deserve this. But you should have thought of this years ago. Damn you, Shannon, and I'll be damned. This confirms everything Bad News Barnes told me. My dear wife Emily has been having an affair with Brad, her sister's husband, for years. And her sister Shannon not only knows about it, but condones it. Joni and her husband Will, as well as Denise and her new husband David, are also in on this unhealthy game. At least they knew Emily was cheating on me. But I still don't understand some things. Brad seems to be holding something over Emily. Is it just the affair, or is there something else? In my profession, people lie, but not many people are good at it. I didn't think Emily could, but she's certainly better than I thought. She's been lying about our marriage for years. If I tell her directly what I know, I'm unlikely to get answers. Besides, I have no desire to get into a face-to-face confrontation until I know everything. Friday morning, a week before Thanksgiving, I woke up early and made breakfast for Emily and me. Hey, sweetie, when are you going to the lake? I'll be driving to Boston today instead of taking the subway, and I'll leave just after noon to stop by Shannon's, and then we'll drive to the lake together. Unless traffic is terrible, we'll get there around 7 or so. Well, please drive carefully. I have a meeting in Washington on Monday and Tuesday, so since you won't be here, I'll fly in tomorrow morning. I've booked a direct flight from Reagan to Manchester on Wednesday night. Should I rent a car, or will you pick me up? I'll pick you up. By then, I can't wait to see you. It's really going to be sad. Patrick's staying in Ithaca for Thanksgiving, and Caitlin's in Paris. Like it's not even Thanksgiving at all. I started crying. Emily came over and put her arm around my shoulders. I know, sweetie. You've loved Thanksgiving since I first met you. Em, family is everything, and it will never be the same again. Emily left for work, and I started making calls, first to an attorney, then to a financial advisor. Then I called a friend who has a friend who knows someone. I wanted to ruin O'Hare's Thanksgiving celebration, and I would pay a little more for it. Even before noon, elaborate video equipment was set up all over the lake house. The next order of business was overcoming my biggest fear. Emily was very organized, so I know she kept all the family medical records. I found what I was looking for in her office next to our bedroom. I then called a friend at Mass General Hospital to make sure I understood what I was looking at. It broke my heart, but it became another piece of the puzzle. I didn't have appointments in Washington, D.C., but I drove there in a car with surprisingly few items from our home and nearly quarter-century marriage. I needed the car there, as I was going to fly back to Washington on Thanksgiving evening. I called a friend in Oxford and another in Stanford. I needed to make sure I had something to do after the Thanksgiving apocalypse. I thought about it, and the symbolism fit. When everything goes to shit, I'll be a zombie. While in D.C., I downloaded videos of a weekend of games at the lake house with the O'Hara sisters. I saw sex between every possible combination of men and women, as well as women and men in threesomes. It turned out that my wife was sleeping with all three of my sons-in-law. Not surprisingly, she engaged in more adventurous behavior with them than with me, including taking an assertive role with each of them, with the exception of Brad. With him, she was submissive to the point of tolerating physical and verbal abuse. Brad beat her, called her a whore, a fat cow, and a personal sex slave. All of this she took without comment or even reaction. However, whenever he began to berate me, calling me a weak nerd and a half-man with a pencil, she would flinch and ask him, albeit meekly, to stop. I wondered, but by this point, I didn't really care. The evening before Thanksgiving, I arrived at the Manchester airport, and Emily met me. She hugged me and let me know how happy she was to see me. I only had carry-on luggage, so we went straight to the car. As usual, she let me drive. She took my hand, and I heard her crying. "What's the matter, honey?" "I'm just sad that the kids won't be here, that's all." When we got to the lake house, it was late, and the only one who hadn't yet retired to his room for the night was Emily's father, Patrick. He was 77 years old and still physically strong. He couldn't sleep in bed, so I'm sure he spent the night in his TV room, watching old movies and napping. I greeted him, and he shook my hand firmly. It then dawned on me that this was the last day I was going to be welcome in his presence, and I was going to make his life even sadder, which made me sad. As we settled into our bedroom, it occurred to me that none of the sexual escapades I had seen on video had been filmed on this bed. I looked up and saw that the camera was on top of the bookshelf. But nothing was happening here. Emily kissed me goodnight and rolled over onto her back. That's what she used to do when we were around other family members. In all the time we had been married, she had never allowed herself to have sex when we were in the same house as her family. For the first time, I was glad of that and laughed silently at the irony. I got up early and went for a morning walk in the cold and chill of a November morning in New Hampshire. I knew it would be my last walk around the lake. Emily and I Skyped with each of our kids and wished them a happy Thanksgiving. Then she headed into the kitchen to help with the preparations. Although I am equally in charge of cooking in our house, this time the O'Hare women, led by matriarch Sarah, were in charge of everything, with Emily, Shannon, Joni, and Denise helping them. Thanksgiving went on as usual. The meal was to be held after the first soccer game. Patrick, Will, David, and that asshole Brad sat on the couches in the family room watching the game. I sat in the back, away from the others. Twice, Patrick and David asked me why I was so far away from the TV, inviting me to join them. I simply replied that I was fine. Brad breathed on me, but loud enough for everyone to hear, and said, "It's just the way he is." After dinner, I asked Joni's oldest daughter, Heather, to take all of her cousins downstairs to the playroom. I asked her to keep them there until one of the adults told them they could go upstairs. I then invited everyone to join me at the TV in the family room. Motioning for Sarah and Patrick to take the seats of honor, I began my speech. As you know, I was raised in foster care. You are the only family I have ever had. From the very first Thanksgiving with you, I felt loved and accepted. So I want to share this video presentation with all of you. However, it is actually intended for our dear parents, Sarah and Patrick. The rest of you have seen this or something similar in the past, but they haven't. You will notice that there are boxes of tissues on the table, as I expect there will be tears. I know I cried while putting this together. With those words, I pressed a button on the TV remote and pulled out my phone. I pressed a few buttons, and the phone took over control of the TV. I then moved to the back of the room so as not to disturb it. The show started with a video of Brad taking Emily from behind and her screaming, "Take my ass, motherfucker," and it went on from there, with shots and video clips of all sorts of sexual acts involving everyone in the room except Sarah and Patrick's parents and, of course, me. As you can imagine, the screaming started almost immediately. Brad screamed, "What the hell? I'm going to kill you!" At this point, he jumped up and I calmly said, "Sit down, Brad," and shot him with the stun gun. Brad didn't sit down. He fell over, staggering. After a few more minutes, accompanied by crying and screaming, especially when Joni and Denise saw the scenes of Brad punching and shouting insults at Emily, my soon-to-be ex-father-in-law looked me in the eye and humbly said, "That's enough, son." I looked at his wife, who, with her head buried in his shoulder, was sobbing and, out of respect, stopped the video. Then I turned back to the TV. "I want to apologize to you, Patrick and Sarah. I'm sure it was as hard for you to see this as it was for me when I first discovered this disgusting activity on the part of your children and their spouses, except for me, of course. It seems that Brad and Emily had been having sex for at least as long as she had been married to me, and possibly longer. And it was with Shannon's consent and even cooperation. I don't know when Joni, Will, Denise, and David joined this sex fest, but I do know that it was the real reason for the end of Denise's marriage to her first husband, Matt." I continued. "Worst of all, as if this debauchery and infidelity wasn't enough, I also discovered that I am not the biological father of our two children, Caitlin and Sean Patrick, which, by the way, they both now know. I informed them of this via email just before we all sat down for our wonderful family celebration. At this point, Emily went from tears to sobs. "Of course, dear wife, I don't know who their biological father really is. It could be Brad, or it could be any other man you slept with while you were making a fool of me. So who is it, or don't you know?" By this point, I realized I was starting to speak louder. I didn't want to sound inappropriate, so I took a deep breath and waited for Emily's response. Shannon spoke up. "Henry, I'm so sorry, but Brad is the father." "Oh my God, I was hoping it was Brad. That explains why Sean Patrick is so much taller and handsomer than me. Well, then let's get back to good old Brad, my loving brother-in-law. Shannon, ask your husband to sit down and wipe his mouth." I'm drooling with embarrassment. I want him to hear this. "Brad, come on, pull yourself together. Brad, I thought about suing you for years of child support since I raised your kids. But my lawyer didn't think it was a good idea since you'd be in jail." "What the hell?" "Well, Brad, as you may know, I have friends in Washington, including in a small group of nerds like me in the SEC. Brad, you know the SEC, right? I'm not talking about soccer, Brad. I'm talking about the SEC. It seems the SEC gang got a little bored recently and decided, on a tip, to investigate Brad. Looks like our guy's a little sloppy." "Okay, maybe even very sloppy. Sounds like you're going to need a lawyer, old Brad." At this point, Brad decided to jump up and follow me again. "You motherfucker." At this point, I tasered him again. He soiled his pants, falling to the floor again and shuddering. "Oh, Brad, 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 Brad." "Well, since Brad's out of it, let's talk to Will and David. Guys, I thought we were friends, but friends don't have each other's wives behind their backs. So I guess we were never friends. And gentlemen, I'm going to do something in the name of retribution, but I haven't decided yet. You see, I want it to be appropriate, and I haven't had time yet to think about what that might be. Unlike you and your lovely wives, this is all a bit of a surprise to me, but believe me, I'll be sure to answer you." They both lowered their eyes. "Joni, after what Emily did to me, your betrayal hurts the most. You're the closest person I've ever had to a sister. I thought you really cared about me. I thought you respected and loved me. I will miss you, but obviously, it's over between us." And now to my loving wife. "Emily, look at me." She had held her face in her hands, shaking with sobs. Now she raised her head, looked into my eyes, and whispered, "I'm so sorry." Dear Emily, that's practically the definition of too little and too late, isn't it? Now that our sham marriage is over, tell me, did you ever love me? You gave me the bare minimum of sexual relations for a quarter century, and it turns out it wasn't because you were cold, or conservative, or shy. It turns out you were deliberately turning me down at the behest of your best lover, Brad. And I get it. I really do. He gave you everything I couldn't. I'm glad to know that's what you really wanted. And isn't it great that your dear little sister Shannon agreed to share it with you? Good for you. I walked over to the TV and pulled out the large manila paper envelope I had put there earlier. So, dear wife, here is the next chapter. In this envelope are the divorce papers. Sign them and send them to your lawyer. You see, you're filing for divorce, not me. You're filing for divorce under irreconcilable differences. You're going to tell people that you just don't love me anymore and that I can't satisfy you sexually. Yeah, that's the ticket. I think you'll find the terms quite fair, more than suitable. You get a house in Cambridge. It's paid for and worth a lot in today's market if you decide to sell it. Of course, you get our share of the place, too. I certainly don't want anything more to do with this little love shack. I'll take the apartment in Washington. Also in the envelope, you will find further instructions, such as how to contact me if necessary. And, if you argue with me about anything, the little movie presentation you saw today will be a box office smash, seen by Caitlin, Sean Patrick, people from church, Boston Public Library leaders, and anyone else I can think of. At that moment, the doorbell rang. Perfect timing. I'm just on my way to the airport. I'm sorry I ruined Thanksgiving for you. You ruined my life. And on my way out the door, I tasered Brad one more time. It wasn't necessary, but it was certainly appropriate. I lied. I told Emily and the others that I had sent my children, Caitlin and Sean Patrick, a letter detailing their mother's betrayal and infidelity. Of course, I hadn't done that, but I wanted Emily to think I'd lost my mind, that I could do something so cruel and, how shall I put it, inappropriate. I wanted her to lose the confidence that she knew me and could predict what I'd do next and continue to treat me like shit. On the way from the lake house to the airport, I called the kids. I needed to talk to them before Emily did. Since it was already late at night in Paris, I called Caitlin first. Hi, Daddy. How are you? Did something happen? Yes, sweetie, I have to tell you something very sad. I know it's going to hurt you a lot. Daddy, did someone die? No, but in a way, yes. In the last few weeks, I found out that your mother was having an affair with your Uncle Brad, and it's been going on for years. Oh my God, Dad! That's terrible! Oh my God! How could she do this to us? I don't know, honey, but it's worse. I found out today that I'm not your biological father. He is. And to you and to your brother, your mother lied to all of us all these years. That asshole is my father. No, Dad, I'm not going to let that happen. He's not going to be my father. You're my father. Dad, that asshole is a pervert. He's picking on me and the other older girls, the cousins. He tries to grab our asses and says he wants to see us naked. Dad, how could she do that to us? This isn't going to change anything in our relationship. I'm still your daddy and always will be. Yes, Daddy, yes. Daddy, you're getting a divorce, aren't you? Yes, sweetheart. Your mom and I are over. I hate her. I know you do. It was a 90-minute drive from Lake Winnipesaukee to the Manchester airport, so I had time to call Sean Patrick in Ithaca, too. The call was just as painful. My son uttered a few more swear words, but I let him vent. After we finished talking, we started making plans. Dad, I'll finish my exams on the 10th. Where am I going to go for Christmas? I'll be in Washington, D.C., and you can come there for the vacations or for the whole time. I know your mom will be waiting for you at home, but it's totally up to you. Dad, I'm not going home to be with her. I never want to see her again. Buddy, I understand, but I hope that will change with time. She loves you and will still want to be your mother. Dad, I really don't care what she wants. How can I go from love to hate in one phone call? Buddy, I totally get it. After the adrenaline-fueled confrontation, I was exhausted. I passed out on the airplane but stayed awake during the short flight to Reagan. By the time I picked up my car from the long-term parking lot and got to the condo, it was past 11 p.m. I undressed, showered, snacked on a sandwich, and settled down on the couch to watch highlights of the soccer games I had missed. I fell asleep in my chair and woke up around 5:30 a.m., my usual time. Over the next few days, I felt more or less numb. I sort of expected to go through the Kubler-Ross stages of grief. You know, denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. But there seemed to be no rhyme or reason to my emotions. One minute I was angry, then sad, then furious, then just cold. Mostly cold is numbness. Early on, after a conversation with my ex-brother-in-law, Matt Bad News Barnes, I decided I wasn't going to hate myself, wasn't going to question whether I was a good enough husband. I know I was. I was a great husband, just not the kind Emily wanted. She wanted someone who would treat her like a whore, because she is a whore. And I refused to be married to a whore, so I would never treat my wife like one. I've always been guided by my brain, and my emotions have followed. That's the way it was going to be now. I wasn't going to whine and cry like a victim. It was Emily and her sisters who were sick, not me. I was going to be okay. On the Saturday after Thanksgiving, a package arrived via FedEx. It was carefully packed with extra padding, and strange scenarios about bombs or possibly anthrax ran through my head. Crazy, I know. Then I checked the address and the lettering. The first thing I saw inside was a note. Henry, after you left, I realized you had no pie. I always bake an extra apple pie just for you. It always meant so much to me that you loved my pie. Love, Sarah, Mom. Starting the Sunday after Thanksgiving and every day after that, Sarah called my cell phone. I didn't pick up the phone, but listened to her messages. Some days they were long, diatribes about how she needed to explain everything and how much she loved me. Other days, a few words with a pleading, "Henry, please." I never answered the phone. Caitlin and I Skyped every day, and Sean Patrick and I texted each other. They both told me that their mother also called them every day. They didn't answer. When they told me about it, I didn't respond. Emily is going to have to try to repair that relationship. The children are adults now, and they have choices to make. On Monday, I received a text from a friend who had heard about the incident from an SEC contact. The FBI got involved and arrests were made. My asshole future ex-brother-in-law Brad Smithson was in big trouble. One of the advantages of being a professor in the 21st century is that students submit their papers online. I met with my doctoral students via video conference. I had no reason to return to campus or return to Boston for any other reason until the end of January. On the first Friday in December, I was unloading groceries from my car, and my neighbor Ted Evans picked up a package and walked into the house. "So, Henry, what's going on? You're not usually here more than a few days at a time and never for a weekend. What's going on?" "Ted's a good guy, a Prince George's County detective. For as long as I've known him, he's been divorced, has grown kids, and is a connoisseur of good beer. We grilled steaks. Yes, real men grill steaks, even in December, and drank some of his good beer. And I told him the story." "Oh man, I'm so sorry. I know how that feels. And don't beat yourself up for not seeing it. I'm a detective, and I was blindsided." "But how could I not see any of the signs?" "Henry, it's because you weren't looking for them. It's called confirmation bias. You loved your wife, and you believed she loved you. So everything you saw, you took as confirmation of your belief. You would only see it if you were hit in the head by a 2x 4-inch object, as in the conversation with, what was his name? Bad News Barnes? It was only after that conversation that you saw the rest of the evidence." "But, Henry, I have to ask you something. If I were you, I'd burn my house down with my wife. You were cool about it, or so it seemed to me. Why?" "I know it's true, but it's not over yet. When I first realized that she had not just cheated on me, but absolutely betrayed me, I immediately decided two things. One, I'm not going to stoop to her level. I'm a really good guy." "You are, buddy." "Thank you." Chuckles. "You are." And I refuse to stop being a good person. I refuse to let her turn me into something I'm not. Remember when someone said, "When they go down, we go up"? Now I know there are a lot of knee-jerk Neanderthals out there who think the only way out is to burn the bitch. But I refused to do that because she is the mother of my children, and I knew the day would come when I would have to face them, and I would feel bad about the way I treated their mother. "Wait a minute! My knuckles are a good 6 inches off the ground, but I guess I'm a Neanderthal. I was trying to destroy my ex. The only thing stopping me was I knew I'd lose my job if I did what I wanted to do to her and her lover. And now that you say that, I was worried that I would be perceived as a typical cop with anger management issues. I refuse to be that guy. But if you think I'm some kind of saint or something, there's more. Ted, do you go to church? Well, I used to when I was a kid. Not so much lately, although I'm thinking about going back. Ted, I'm a good Catholic, and I remember in the book of Romans, St. Paul says that if you treat your enemy with kindness, burning coals will fall on his head. Henry, St. Paul quotes the book of Proverbs when he says this. I thought you didn't go to church, but I did when I was a kid, to a Black Baptist church. And in the black church, the preacher every Sunday preached sermons from the entire Bible, Old Testament and New Testament. And I memorized that passage because I thought it was cool to kill your enemies with kindness. That's exactly right. If I attacked Emily with scorched earth, it would destroy her, and she would hate me. But if the fire came down from above, she would face something worse than hate. Shame. She would spend the rest of her life in guilt and shame for the way she had treated a good man. She will sit in our house and feel shame. Every time she speaks to our children, shame. Every picture, every memory is shame. There will never be an excuse for what she did. You're right. It's worse than that. And the best part is that your hatred for her doesn't consume you because you can let her go. That's right. Or at least I hope so. Eventually, in mid-January, I had to move back to Boston. A new semester at Tufts and Harvard meant I'd have to be there at least 3 days a week. The lawyer hadn't received any paperwork from Emily, which meant I would have to contact her soon, resorting to gentle persuasion. It was 11:45 a.m. on a Wednesday morning, and I was at Harvard. I was just finishing a lecture on the role of appeasement in 20th century diplomacy when I saw 2 men standing at the door to the lecture hall. As I stepped out, I saw that they were Will and David, my 2 sons-in-law, who were both sleeping with my wife. Will spoke first. Henry, can we talk to you? I don't think we have anything to talk about. We really want you to hear our side of the story. Well, let's go to the classroom. David said, Could we go into your office to be alone? No, it's going to be fine here, and it's going to be short, I'm sure. Let me just send this message, and then we'll talk. They sat in the front row, and I stood leaning against the lectern at the front of the auditorium. Speak up, boys, you have about 3 minutes. They looked at me and at each other with bewilderment, and then Will began. Henry, I have a lot of respect for you. I've always considered us friends. I think I mentioned at Thanksgiving that friendship is non-negotiable, but go on. Henry, we thought you knew what was going on. Our wives told us that you and Emily had an agreement, that you had an open marriage and that you were okay with Emily having sex with us. Yes, Henry, David put in. Denise told me that you just weren't interested in sex anymore and couldn't meet Emily's needs, so you gave her permission to go elsewhere. And that's when I realized it. David couldn't control himself. The smirk. And I realized what I was going to do with those 2. So why didn't you ask me that yourself? Will again. I thought you'd be embarrassed if I broached the subject, that you'd think like I saw you as less than. Now, David. Yeah, a wuss. And we couldn't do that to you, so we just didn't bring it up. So your wives told you that Emily wants to screw you, and poor old Henry doesn't mind because it doesn't work for him, and you just accepted it? I see. So you had no problem making me a cuckold? Yes, that's right, no, said David. Henry. Anyway, we've known for a while that Emily and Brad were doing it, and Joni told me you were okay with it, so we just thought, Will said. You just figured you might as well get involved too. I got it. At that moment, 3 Harvard police officers burst into the room. Dr. Gwardsman, is everything all right? Thank you, officers. I appreciate your quick response. Please escort these 2 men off campus. They are trespassing. Please get their names, as I want to make sure they have a trespassing case filed against them. If you need me to, I will gladly file a formal harassment complaint. And officers, am I understanding correctly that such a complaint, if filed, would also go into the database of both the Cambridge and Boston police departments? Is that correct? Yes, Dr. Gwardsman. Well then, I'll come by after my next class and do the paperwork. As the officers led my former sons-in-law out of the auditorium, I said, Gentlemen, don't forget Monty Python. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. For the next few months, I spent at least Tuesday through Thursday evenings in Boston, teaching and advising graduate students at the Fletcher School at Tufts and the Kennedy School at Harvard. On Tuesday morning, I would take an early flight from Reagan to Boston's Logan Airport and return to Washington late Thursday night. I'll be working in Oxford over the summer and moving to Palo Alto full-time in the fall as a professor of international diplomacy at Stanford. Emily and I had talked about living in both places, and it was our dream for the future. I saw no reason not to realize my dream without her. The evening after Will and David's visit, I spent a few hours in my room at the Harvard Square Marriott Hotel, where I was living off the grid, and did a little video editing. Late that night, I sent Emily an email addressed to Emily O'Hara. One of the terms of the divorce was that she could no longer use the name Gwardsman. Emily O'Hara, the attorney is still waiting for the paperwork. Sign and return them within the next 10 days, or the attached video will be sent out to friends, co-workers, and family. Henry Gardman. A 10-minute video was attached to the letter. The video began with the voice of the announcer. Ladies and gentlemen, you think you know Emily Gwardsman, now Emily O'Hara, but this is the real Emily. Keep in mind that the video you are about to see depicts events that occurred while she was married to Henry Gwardsman. None of these acts were done with his permission or knowledge. The men in this video are the husbands of Emily's sisters. Viewers are advised to exercise caution. The next sound is Emily screaming, I'm a goddamn whore! The following Tuesday night, the cavalcade of stars included the next. Joni, Will's wife, and my closest sister-in-law came to my office. She had been in my office before and knew her way past the security desk. Henry, can I come in? Sure, come in and sit down. I'm just about to have some tea. I have a throat coat since I'm losing my voice due to annual winter vocal cord problems. What would you like? Green, please. Joni sat down on the couch at the back of the room. I couldn't sit at my desk with her sitting there as the conversation would be too awkward due to the distance, so I sat in my chair across from the couch. Joni and I found ourselves in the same positions many times. She knew it was my thinking chair. Henry, I'm so sorry. Joni, I'm sure you're sorry for the end result, but I'm not sure you're sorry for what happened to bring us here. But I am sorry. I really am. I hope you'll let me tell you what I know. Joni, I really don't need to know more than what I know. Emily slept with Brad behind my back the entire time we were married, and everyone seemed to know it but me. Not only that, no one thought it was a bad thing. And no one thought it was bad that Emily got pregnant twice by Brad, and you all let me believe the kids were mine. And you slept with Brad, as did your little sister Denise, all with Shannon's permission, and Will and David slept with Emily. One big, happy, incestuous, and fucked-up family. Welcome to the O'Hara clan. I think that's about right, but there are a few details in between that I think you should know. But first, you need to hear what happened after your Thanksgiving presentation. My dad freaked out. He started yelling at all of us, saying he was ashamed that we were his children and that you were the only worthy one of us. Emily ran out of the house and was gone until the next morning. We thought she had followed you, but early that morning the police found her at the end of the lake by Alton Bay. She spent the next day in the hospital. Will and I left right after you, as did Denise and David. I don't know about them, but Will and I had a big fight. He was so embarrassed because I told him you knew about us all playing together. Please don't use that word. Playing sounds so innocent, and what you all were doing wasn't like that at all. I know it wasn't. Anyway, I really want to tell you about what happened, sort of a what Joni knew and when she found out story. I know it won't lead to you thinking I'm innocent, but I need to tell it. Please. I didn't say anything and just sipped my tea. About 5 years ago, Emily and Shannon came to Denise and me. They told us about Em and Brad. It was a strange story, but it was almost impossible to make up. Apparently, Brad had had a thing for Emily ever since she and Shannon started dating. Once, when they weren't married yet but living together, he told Shannon that he wished she had a body more like Emily's, and Shannon was very upset. She told Brad, "Well, If that's the way you feel, why don't you just go ahead and fuck her? This was before you and Emily even met. That night, Emily was going to go to Shannon's apartment for dinner, but when she got there, Shannon wasn't there. Brad got Emily drunk. You know how Em can't stand alcohol, and seduced her. Shannon returned, and Brad got Emily into bed. Brad took Emily's virginity. Of course, Shannon was furious. She kicked Brad out, and Emily was ashamed. Emily left, and Shannon didn't hear from Emily for weeks. Shannon forgave Brad, but Emily still couldn't look her in the eye. Shannon had to beg her to be at the wedding. Once you started dating Emily, Brad became very jealous. That first Thanksgiving, when you came to the house, Shannon and Brad had a huge fight. Shannon had to take a week-long trip to North Carolina for work, and she was seriously considering leaving Brad. During that trip, this was just before you and Em got engaged, Brad contacted Emily and asked her to come over for dinner. She didn't know Shannon was away. Brad seduced her again, and I guess that's when the affair began. Emily was always jealous of the attention Shannon paid to her beauty, while Em considered herself an ugly duckling. Now here was a handsome man who wanted her. Of course, Shannon knew nothing about it. What about me? According to the timeline, that's when we were supposed to fall in love. Henry, I know. It doesn't make sense. It was like Emily was living two lives. She was having regular sex with Brad and at the same time professing her undying love for you. And frankly, I don't think she consciously realized the insanity of it all. There's no doubt that she loved you. She did. But in doing so, she behaved in a way that went against not only that but her moral values, including betraying her sister. So the two of you get married, and she stops seeing Brad for a few months. But then Brad begs her, and they start dating again. And he starts being very rude to her, including making her do things she didn't do with you. Brad knew you were both trying to get pregnant and intentionally ripped the condom. Emily gets pregnant and freaks out. She's sure you'll leave her unless she can convince you that the baby is yours. And still Shannon doesn't know anything? That's right. She has no idea her husband and her sister are having an affair. But then Brad takes it to the next level. He forces Emily to tell Shannon that she's pregnant and he's the father. Shannon can't have children, and Brad wants to show her that he is man enough to be a father. Brad and Emily tell Shannon, and Brad threatens to leave Shannon and tell you the whole story if Shannon won't let him keep seeing Emily. That's crazy. I know. Emily wants to end things with Brad, but he won't do it. So Emily keeps seeing Brad once a month because Brad is blackmailing her, and Shannon lets it go on to save her marriage and yours. Wait a minute. If Shannon knows Brad is such an asshole and has treated her like one for so long, why doesn't she just leave him? And if Emily betrayed her, why should she care about Emily's marriage to me? Because Brad has something on Shannon that she doesn't want our mom and dad to know about. The reason Shannon can't have children is because she got pregnant her freshman year of college and had an abortion, and with complications. You saw how my parents reacted years ago when Denise got pregnant, carried the baby to term, and gave it up for adoption. Shannon was sure that if they found out she had an abortion, they would disown her. So she told Brad all this, and he used it against her. There's no bigger asshole than Brad Smithson. Exactly. And so Emily and Brad continue to sleep behind your back, and Brad gets more and more abusive. Emily wants to leave but can't risk it, and Shannon can't push her. And then Emily gets pregnant again. And the hitting continues. That brings us to about 5 years ago. Brad decides he wants to ramp up the party and tells Shannon and Emily to do whatever they need to do, but let Denise and I play too. First, they try to tell us how big and good Brad is, but we both refuse. Then they tell us about the blackmail Brad is using on Emily, and Denise agrees. I still refuse, at which point I seriously consider telling you, but Emily came to me with a plea, and I said I would only do it if we could convince our husbands to open our marriages and they would participate as well. In other words, I would only cheat on Will if it wasn't cheating, and he would play with my sisters. That's the only way I would do it because I couldn't handle the guilt. So we started. We got together twice a year. What you saw was the 9th time. One day I overheard Emily on the phone talking about trying to get me involved. What was it? I told them a few months ago that Will and I weren't going to be involved anymore, and that I couldn't handle the guilt of not knowing, if not about the past, at least about what we were doing now. So, Denise and I came up with the idea of inviting you, and we'll all act like we're just getting started. Joni, this is a very interesting story. Unbelievable. And I mean that literally. I don't believe it. However, even in the best-case scenario, I see the only possible motivation for Emily's actions as love for Brad, and blatant disrespect for me. Henry, I understand why you doubt that. It just sounds perverse, and I can't explain Emily's behavior. Honestly, I have no idea what your sex life with Emily was like, but I have to say that Brad was much better than Will. I love Will more than life, but he's just not very good in bed. I wouldn't sacrifice my marriage for better sex, but I can understand the attraction to Brad. However, from what I saw on the Thanksgiving video, Brad has never been as hard on me as he was on Emily. Joni, I don't think your story of depravity changed anything, but I hope it helped you to tell it because it sure didn't help me. I think I need to go to bed. Henry, I know we probably won't be friends anymore, but please know how sorry I am. For everything. And one more thing. After Thanksgiving went down, Brad told my parents about Shannon's abortion. I don't see them staying together. I have to admit, as Joni was leaving my office, I was surprised and amazed that she didn't ask me about whether I had done anything to hurt her husband. Perhaps it was because she didn't think I was capable of such a thing. The daily calls from Emily continued. Henry, I know you talked to Joni. Please talk to me. There are other things you need to know. Please, I love you. I'm so sorry. 2 days later, I got a call from my lawyer. Emily had signed the papers. Brad Smithson got his 15 minutes of fame, as I saw in the Boston Globe newspaper and on News Center 5. He didn't go to jail, but he will no longer work in the financial industry, and the fine he paid has drastically changed his lifestyle. Too bad for Shannon, because when she filed for divorce, there wasn't much left of him. I waited a few months before letting the other shoe drop. I was getting pretty good at video editing. I sent Will and David an edited video of their wives having sex with Brad. But it wasn't the pictures, it was the audio recordings. In them, you hear Joni and Denise not just respond in agreement to Brad saying he's much better than their husbands, but both ladies go much further. They call their husbands wimps, tiny assholes, selfish in bed, not real men, and my favorite part, pathetic. So much for David's smirk. I didn't send the video to anyone else, but the audio went to their co-workers and friends. It was July. The divorce had been finalized months ago, and I was settled in Oxford. I still hadn't seen or spoken to Emily. The calls stopped a few days after the divorce became official. Caitlin called from Boston. Her grandfather Patrick had died. She would attend the funeral, as would Sean Patrick. I stayed in England. I sent flowers. He was a good and honorable man, and I thought it was appropriate. Epilogue. All of this happened 4 years ago. Today is the funeral for Sarah, Emily's mother. Caitlin and Sean Patrick were there. I live in Palo Alto and did not attend. No, I haven't remarried, and I don't see anyone regularly. I don't have the energy for that. No, Mom, Dad's not coming, Sean Patrick answered his mother's question. Why can't he just move on and forget about it? Why can't he just forgive me? Why does he have to keep all his pain? Caitlin replied, Mom, he does. Dad has fully and completely come to terms with it. He doesn't feel hate for you. He doesn't feel anything for you. Then why isn't he here? He probably can't stand to see me. I've remarried, and he probably can't stand it. Trust us, Mom. He's not here because he just doesn't care. He doesn't even know you're married. What do you mean? Didn't you tell him? No, Mom. We didn't tell him because he doesn't ask about you. He never does. He just doesn't care. And when are you two going to find someone and get married and give me grandchildren? Well, Mommy dearest, it's not going to happen anytime soon. I guess we've never seen the model of a good marriage. Yes, Mom. I wouldn't go anywhere near a marriage. Never. Not after what you showed us. And the children told me about this conversation, and that's how I found out that Emily remarried. I don't know any of the details. I don't need to. I don't care. Except that it seems like the burning embers are still falling down. It all seems appropriate.